Welcome to Paella Week on W2 Kitchen, where we explore this wonderful, wonderful rice dish that's famous around the world. To get us started on this journey, I thought we would cook the original recipe, Paella Valenciana. Like any dish with that much fame and that much history behind it, everyone has their recipe, and this is simply my best attempt. For us to better understand paella in general, why we do each step, why we use certain ingredients, and later this week, how we could better adopt it for the domestic kitchen. So, let's begin. First things first, we heat up the pan. Just like the famous martini as a drink, paella is actually named after the pan itself. And the irony is, this is certainly not designed for the domestic kitchen for multiple reasons. For one, it does not heat evenly. But in the spirit of the traditional recipe, we'll try to do it and make it work. So, once this is heated, generous amount of olive oil. You can use refined olive oil, you don't need to use extra virgin. It would not make a difference to the finished product, I promise you that. Once the oil starts to shimmer, we add our meat. So, in the traditional recipe, we have rabbit and we have chicken. In some recipes, they also call for pork and snail. So contrary to the famous dishes that you see outside of Spain and particularly outside of Europe, paella is actually not a seafood dish. Workers tending the fields in Valencia used to cook them with scrap meat, and seafood back then was a luxury. So, to really develop flavor, we are searing crab out of the meat to develop, to really brown them, to cause the Maillard reaction, protein with fat at high heat. That's what's gonna make the meat taste meaty. And, as you can see, we're currently sticking a little bit because the carbon steel pan is by definition not non-stick, and it's absolutely fine. In fact, that's what we want to develop. To have some sticky bits, to have the fond, so that when we deglass the pan with our tomato, with our water, we'll develop a very flavorsome cooking liquid for the rice. The traditional paella never calls for stock, it's always just water. They like to claim that water in the region is what makes the rice. But since we don't have access to that water, the Maillard reaction is our next best bet. Today I'm just using the thigh meat of a French rabbit and thigh meat from baby chicken, chicken Puzan. For me, because of the short cooking time, they impart a lot more flavors and a lot more collagen, which would slightly thicken the broth. But you can use simply just chicken thighs, the whole rabbit. You see, these burn bits, the fond, these are what's going to give us the flavors and broth, the flavors of cooking liquid. And the reason why I chose thigh meat is because they actually need a bit of cooking time and temperature for them to tenderize. If you use breast meat, the moment they go above 67 degrees Celsius, they'll dry up. And like most famous rice dishes, it's important to remember that this is a rice dish, not a meat dish. So it's tempting to recreate what you see in the streets of Spain. Large pans with so much toppings that you could barely see the rice. But the objective of the exercise is to make the rice as flavorsome as possible. Once everything is golden brown and you have developed this golden circle in the middle of burn bits, we continue our journey to develop flavors by adding the vegetable to cook the sofrito. Now, sofrito is a very loosely defined term in Spanish cooking, and it could be anything. But by most accounts, the authentic version contains only two things: some flat green beans and a local variation of butter beans called garofo. Now, since they don't grow in London, these are canned garofo beans from Spain, and the flat green beans are from Kenya, but that would just have to do. They go in, and the choice of ingredient for this sofrito is actually very clever because beans by definition are extremely high in protein. And as we explained earlier, protein, fat, and high heat, that's what's gonna give us the Maillard reaction. So the wisdom of this recipe is that they're using vegetable protein to reinforce the meatiness of the chicken, of the rabbit. It's incredibly clever. Now, we season for the first time with salt. A, because we have not seasoned the meat, and B, the salt will help the green beans release their moisture. The moisture will then start to deglass the pan, start to mop up these wonderful burn bits at the bottom. Now, once the beans have taken on some color, we add our sweet paprika. The traditional recipe never calls for smoked version, so make sure you get the sweet version. And we go about 1 teaspoon per person. Oh, you can smell it immediately, it's wonderful. Once the flavors have emulsified, we add our passata. This is basically canned chopped tomato. If you're cooking this in tomato season, feel free to chop fresh tomato. We're in spring now, so canned version would have to do. And this again would continue to deglass the pan. We cook the tomato to evaporate their water content and concentrate their flavors. And to give it the signature spice and color, a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of saffron. Not because I'm being cheap, but this is overpowering. So even if you could afford to not be cheap, don't go ham. And now we really deglass the pan to make our rice cooking liquid. And for that, I like to add my water bit by bit to make sure I've mopped up everything. You can even tell from the small circle that the fond is developing. My point that the paella dish is really not for the domestic kitchen because it was designed for proper fire. You see, by adding water slowly, I can make sure everything is being mopped up and nothing is getting burned at the bottom. Once that's done, we add the rest of the water. At this stage, we want to cook the rabbit and the chicken for them to really release their flavors and for the connective tissue in the thigh meat to really break down into extremely yummy collagen and thus also slightly thickening the sauce or the broth. For chicken thighs, it normally takes at least 30 minutes. But since the rice itself would take about 20 minutes to cook, we're gonna give them a 15-minute head start. So once this is back to a boil, we keep it at medium heat, 15 minutes. I'll see you then. All right. After 15 minutes, everything has emulsified and we're ready for the rice. Now, about the rice, two important things to remember. One, you have to use paella rice. There's simply no substitute. I've tried it once with arborio rice. It was a disaster. It's mainly because they absorb, even though they look tiny, they absorb 3 times more liquid than other rice, making them a sponge for flavor. And that's why we work so hard to give the liquid flavor. So today, I'm using Kalaspara rice. You can also use bomba rice, Sendra rice, as long as they're paella rice. The second thing to remember is that what really distinguishes paella from other rice dishes is that they're always individually grained and they have this wonderful, wonderful layer of sticky, golden, slightly burnt bits at the bottom called the sakarate. Similar to clay pot rice if you ever had Cantonese cooking before. And to achieve those two things, you need to do two things. One is to minimize movement once you've added the rice, to not release unnecessary starch and make them bind to each other. And two is that you need to form a very thin layer. One layer for the sakarate and probably just one more layer on top. So don't be too generous with the rice. For a paella dish this big, we're using just 100 grams of rice. Now that we've established there should be minimal movement, we taste and we adjust our seasoning for the final time. In this case, a touch more salt, and we add a bit more water in anticipation of the rice. Now, if you want to be really precise, the optimal ratio between cooking liquid and rice is always 3:1 for any kind of paella rice. Move things around, more even cooking. Once we're back to a boil, we add our rice evenly. You want to try to form one even layer. Since I said minimum movement, all you're allowed to do is to shake it slightly and make sure there's no dry rice on top of your chicken. Anything more than that, you're creating starch. And that's it. Now, as I have explained previously, since most domestic stoves are not equipped to cook paella, to do so in the paella pan requires very, very attentive mothering. In this case, we need to move the center of heating to one side and continue to slowly rotate this throughout the cooking process. They take about 20 minutes to fully absorb. This is not something you can walk away from. Now, while we're waiting, I have to tell you the story I forgot earlier about the mountain shrimp. I always thought the red bell pepper, or bell pepper in general, is a mandatory ingredient in the sofrito. It turned out I was wrong. The reason why it was added in the olden days was to mimic shrimp. So they would sear it and just add strips at the very end for them to look like red prawn. But in terms of flavor, they actually don't use it in the traditional Valenciana variation. So today we'll just skip it. And now we mother this for 20 minutes. I'll see you then. All right, after 20 minutes of intense mothering, during which I switched to the 2 stovetop process to make things easier, we have this wonderful, wonderful beauty. How do you know it's ready? First, of course, you taste the rice for doneness. If it's too tough, you can always add a dash more water. And secondly, when you lift the pan, you should see no liquid going to one side and everything is practically stuck to the bottom in the nicest possible way. Now, it's very, very tempting to dig in right now, but to get the best result, we're going to let it rest for about 5 minutes for the temperature and the moisture to even out. You open a bottle of wine and then it's soccer adet time. I'll see you then. Now, the moment of truth, shall we? You can see it's sticking in the nicest possible way, and that is soccer adet. Sticky, crispy, golden, on the border of being burnt, but not burnt. This is what we work so hard to achieve, and this is what makes paella such a special dish. And this is Paella Valenciana. I really, really hope you enjoy. Boom! That was so good! Ooh.